This is definitely the most common and repeated criticism against Islam without a doubt. You see it in every Instagram comment section wherever Islam is mentioned. Islamophobes absolutely love talking about this whenever they can. And in this video you'll see why this isn't actually even a criticism when you think about all of the facts. Before I start the video, if you intend to make a negative comment on this video, please just watch the whole video because you can't afford to argue and to have opinions without being fully informed. Anyways, for those who don't know what I'm talking about 1400 years ago, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ married someone called Aisha radiallahu anha. She was the daughter of his best friend and companion Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, and she was his third wife. And the part people get really confused about, Aisha radiallahu anha was 6 or 7 when they first got engaged, and the marriage was consummated at the age of 9. Now obviously from our modern perspective today this doesn't sound right, but here's the thing, this criticism really falls apart when you take a closer look at all of the truths and all of the context surrounding this. First of all, Islam doesn't give a specific age for marriage. It doesn't say 14, 15, 16, because everyone is different and therefore we have specific criteria instead. Because obviously nobody matures and grows at the same rate. The first criteria is that both parties that are getting married must have reached puberty. So for a boy, his voice is getting deeper.
Bro, I know you're playing around.
He's growing pubic hair and facial hair. He's getting broader shoulders, getting wet dreams and so on. And I'm sure me and you already know this, but I just want to let you know that scholars have also confirmed that Islamically, having wet dreams are a sign of physical maturity and therefore puberty. And the growth of pubic hair is also a valid sign of puberty. And of course now, science agrees with this, and science says that these are signs of physical maturity. And for girls, again, it's pubic hair, menstruation, the growing of the chest, and I don't know, I'm not a girl. And menstruation is said to be a prerequisite for the consummation of a marriage, according to scholars. Unless, of course, she's already, reached the other signs of puberty. So it's not permissible to consummate a marriage with a girl who hasn't menstruated yet. So to simplify it, you basically have to have reached puberty in order to be considered physically mature, according to science and according to Islam. But with that said, me and you both know that just because someone has reached puberty doesn't mean they're ready to get married. Like mental maturity, for example, which brings me on to my next criteria for marriage. In order to get married, a Wali of the girl has to approve of it, and that's usually the father, but if he's dead or something, it would just be someone that the father appointed as a Wali for her. If there isn't someone like that, it would be her grandfather, and there's a whole list that goes on and on. There's basically an order of who can be a Wali, and I'll put that up on screen. But a Wali is basically just an adult male Muslim who is of sound mind and has responsibility over the girl. And by the way, if you're a sister without any Muslim family, maybe you're a Reva or something, your Wali, who has to approve of your marriage, according to Sharia, would be a Muslim ruler or one of his judges. And if that's unavailable, it could be the Imam of the mosque, or basically any Muslim in your community who has authority, power, and he's of good character, etc. So if you want to get married, I guess just go to your mosque and they'll tell you who can be a Wali for you. Anyways, I mentioned the approval of a Wali because usually they know if she's mature, if she's responsible, if she's ready for marriage, not only physically but also mentally. And I guess it's different for reverts because the Wali wouldn't really know you, but in that case I guess they would just judge you generally. And if you're not at the local age of consent, they probably would just reject the marriage. But anyways, so if the Wali, meaning the father, grandfather, brother, whatever, says that she isn't mature yet, halas, it's done, she's not getting married. Therefore you can't really get some kind of predatory situation because the Wali has to approve of it. It's his call. And like I said, he also has to be of sound mind, he has to be of good character, so if he was some kind of degenerate or if his mind is degraded, the responsibility would be passed on to the next person. But anyway, the next criteria is that the bride must give consent. A forced marriage cannot happen in Islam. The bride must be fully on board with it, and if she isn't, the marriage is not valid. Anyway, what this means is that the conditions for marriage are based on maturity, not an arbitrary age like we have today. People mature at different rates depending on their genetics, their environment, and even the climate. So subhanallah, again, we see that someone uses something to criticize Islam and it backfires on them because it reveals that Islam actually has a much better system, which instead of being based on an arbitrary age is based on criteria. But now I'm sure you're saying, well, Aisha, she was 9 years old. How could she have been mentally mature at her age? And yeah, that is a really fair question, but there are two things we need to consider to understand this. The first is that, of course, this happened in 7th century Arabia. Maturity was seen much differently. I guess you could say people were seen as mature at a younger age. I mean, the life expectancy back then was indeed much lower than it is today. Excluding infant mortalities, the life expectancy was around 45 to 60 on average, which is much lower than what it is today. today. But anyways, what I'm saying is that society accepted this. They were fully okay with this. People lived for less time, so marriage from a young age was seen as much more normal. I mean, even only like 200 years ago, the age of marriage in America was only like 10 in most states and even 7 in Delaware. And of course, you see this all throughout the different civilizations among different times. It was just way more normal everywhere to see young people get married and to commit at a young age. And actually, you don't see anyone criticizing the Prophet ﷺ for marrying Aisha at her age back in his time. This is a really recent criticism because this marriage at puberty was seen as completely normal up until very recently. But the societal norms and expectations and views have changed. It's important to know that the Prophet ﷺ had many critics all throughout history. And of course, you don't see any of them criticizing him for his marriage with Aisha radiallahu anha until just a few centuries ago. And another thing is that people kind of matured faster in a way. Like we both know, we've got primary schools or kindergarten as some people call it. We have high schools and all of that stuff. It's really chilled out when we're kids. We're basically just going to school and hanging out with people, and we don't really have any responsibilities until we're like 16. Maybe earlier for some people if you're like a young carer or your parents made you do lots of chores or whatever, yeah? But in general, we don't really need to mature as quickly. We're just kept around other kids for most of our days. So we kind of stay stagnant and mature slower. But back in the day, like in the 7th century or even like 200 years ago, we were just thrown in the cold water when we were kids. We had work from a young age, helping out in the farm, or we had kids in the coal mines, kids helping out with the family business, we got married a lot sooner. We had more things to do. No Amazon, no Uber, no supermarkets, right? Everything was harder. We had to do it ourselves. And so because of all of that extra responsibility, in general, as a society and as individuals, people matured quicker, all right? And all of this ties into the next thing I'll mention. It's the common criticism of people who agree with me. They say, all right, so this marriage, it was okay back then. Things were different, people were different, society was different, sure. But then they say, wait a minute, so this was okay back then, but it isn't now. Doesn't this take away from the supposed timelessness of Islam and the timeless character of the Prophet ﷺ? And yeah, again, this sounds like a great point. How come this doesn't apply anymore? Does this mean Islam was meant for those times and it needs changes? No, we don't need any changes in Islam. Because again, the age of marriage in Islam is not based on age. It's based on criteria. Alright, so that's puberty, which, probably didn't really change over time. Another criteria is, of course, sound judgment and the approval of a wali. If a girl is 9, she's in school, she's being childish, she's not got anything on her mind, her mother hasn't taught her about marriage, etc., this girl would not be married. And this is a standard example of a girl today. You won't see a 9-year-old today like Aisha radiallahu anha. And if you did, if there was a 9-year-old girl today, she reached the age of puberty, her father consented, he agreed and said, alright, she is mature enough, she is old enough, the marriage can happen. Of course, today society would be completely displeased by this because everyone looks at numbers and nobody actually analyzes it. But Islamically, this rare case today would be permissible. But again, you don't see people like that anymore. Childhood is a much slower process today. It's chill, you don't have responsibilities apart from like homework to do on the weekends or to wash a few pots or whatever. But even then, those aren't really responsibilities when you had people back in the day plowing fields for hours on end. Another thing to note is that breaking the law is in general haram according to some jurists, as is decreasing the reputation of Islam. So, I would recommend not trying to marry someone who's very, very young. Even if you think she reaches all the criteria, even if a wali approves of it, because people are just going to call you out and they're going to say, look at that guy, he's a and yeah, so people are just going to call you very bad names and it's going to give a bad name to Islam. So please just marry someone more or less your own age. Another thing I'll mention is that Aisha radiallahu anha was a very scholarly and intelligent person. Alright, she lived on after the Prophet's death sallallahu alaihi wasallam for about 50 years. And in that time she was very, very crucial in transmitting Hadith and all of that stuff. And she spoke very, very well of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She always had the best things to say about him. I mean, she knew him very well, and since she had a very high status and also a huge platform, if she did feel like she was too young, she was groomed or she was exploited or whatever, she could have spoken out about it. I mean, today you do see victims of grooming who, at the time they seem alright with it, they're cool with it, but then as they grow older and they separate, they say, oh yeah, I was a victim, I regretted it and all of that stuff. She could have done that, but she didn't. But again, if she did decide that she didn't like him afterwards, she could just stop speaking well of him, I guess. The fact that she always went out to say the best thing about him, out of her own effort, right? She put in effort to speak well of him, even after his death. death just shows that this was normal at the time. Nobody cared. This was the complete norm in society, and actually a lot more people in that time, in that place, got married at a very young age, and I'll put some sources up for that. Also, another important thing that people miss out is that Aisha radiallahu anha was the only woman who was engaged to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam at a very young age. In fact, his first wife, Khadija radiallahu anha, she was around 40 when they first got married, which was about 15 years older than the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And all the other wives he had throughout his life were roughly more or less the same age as him, and he treated all of them very, very well. Age was just not really a factor people thought about after a certain point. Alright, so to summarize, that we don't really have a minimum age for marriage. Instead, we have criteria. So that's physical maturity, mental maturity, and the consent of a wali. So father or brother, grandfather, whatever. These criteria ensure that you can only get married legally if the person is old enough to get married. Another thing I'll say, right, in Islam, you don't just walk up to a random person and, you know, you make friends and then you say, oh, I want to get married to you. It's not like that, right? Traditionally, you say to a family member, I'm looking for a wife. That family member knows somebody who has a daughter. And then that's kind of how it happens. That's the kind of matchmaking that traditionally happens. Or you go to a mosque and you say, hey, I'm looking for a wife. And then the imam would ask around, he'd say, oh, do you have a daughter? And then that's how the matchmaking is done. So clearly, someone wouldn't give up their 9-year-old daughter just randomly. You know, people don't hear that someone wants to get married and just say, oh, well, I've got an immature daughter who's way too young. How about we just let her get married? You know, these people are fathers, right? They're walis. They are protective over the girls in their family. They wouldn't just let them marry any random guy, and they wouldn't let them marry if they are way too young, alright? But anyways, while 9 years old, and even ages up to 11, 12, 13, 14, some people even say 16 and 18 are too young to get married, these things that happened in the past cannot be criticized now. I mean, if someone got married at that age today, sure, there may be some room for skepticism. But you can't use these modern biases and modern standards and expectations on the people of the past. People's opinions and expectations were just different. Society was different. Not only did people's views on the age of marriage change, but so did the way we view maturity and also the way we facilitate a child becoming mature. It's a lot slower nowadays. But anyways, that was the video. I'm really sorry if I made any mistakes in this video, or if I didn't clarify anything correctly or whatever. Please let me know in the comments if you have any questions, and I'll try to answer as many as I can. But yeah, I want to give a massive shout out to Nasir, Muhammad, Shadeen, Salim, Boris, and Hamza on Patreon. Thank you all so much. May Allah bless you all for the support. And if you liked this video, please consider clicking on this one or this one, and also consider subscribing. And yeah, may Allah bless you all. Assalamu Alaykum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.